This is Garis book readings of my two published paper books, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This is the glossary of my second book, Multis and Monos, what the multicultured can teach the monocultured towards the creation of a global state. This is the glossary part 2, just continuing straight on. Cultures of scale, asterisk. This term is analogous to the term economies of scale, that is, the idea that the unit cost of manufacture is less when goods are made in bulk. The term cultures of scale refers to the idea that bigger cultures tend to produce more ideas and contribute more to world culture than small cultures. For example, the US gives more to the world than Denmark, a much smaller culture. As the planet globalizes and speaks a world language, globans around the world will be able to discuss new ideas easily amongst themselves, not being limited by small national language barriers. As the number of creative genii on the planet is far larger than the number in any one country, once they are able to communicate readily in the global language, new ideas will flourish more readily. Thus the intellectual output of a talented individual will be greater in a global language, in a global culture, than it would be in a national culture with its isolating national language that other cultures don't speak. Cyborg. A cyborg is a portmanteau word for cybernetic organism, that is, a creature that is part machine, part human. Later this century, many people, called cyborgists, may want to become cyborgs by, for example, adding components to their brains to become intellect-like, that is, having the intellectual capacities of intellects, that is, godlike, massively intelligent machines. Cyborgism, asterisk. Cyborgism is the ideology in favour of human beings becoming cyborgs. Many cyborgists feel that cyborgism is the route to avoiding an intellect war between the Terrans and the Cosmists over whether human beings should build intellects later this century or not. The cyborgists argue that if human beings themselves become intellects, then the Terran/Cosmist dichotomy is avoided. The Terrans disagree, saying that there's little difference between an advanced cyborg and a pure intellect. The Terrans will fear both and reject them. Cyborgist, asterisk. A cyborgist is a proponent of the ideology of cyborgism. De-dictation, asterisk. De-dictation is the removal of dictatorships from the earth, thus creating a planet that consists entirely of democratic governments. For example, a mini-glober might decide to use EdSats, that's education satellites, to beam down educational programs to billions of people on the earth, to educate them to the educational standards of the richest countries. This would bring down dictatorial governments, except perhaps for the unique case of China, which is a space power, having the technology to shoot down EdSats. Democratic system. A democratic system is one in which the leaders of a culture are elected by the people, whom the leaders govern, according to a form of social contract, whereby if the leaders do a bad job, the people have the right to throw them out. The leaders usually belong to one of several political parties, which compete with each other regularly for office. Rival political parties keep the ruling party on its toes. If the people become impatient with the performance of the previously elected party, they can elect another party, whom they hope will do a better job. Political leaders, knowing they can be thrown out of office by the people, are motivated to do what the people want. They are the representatives of the people. Once people attain the educational level of the middle class in large numbers and are well informed of the political issues of their culture, they usually want the right to elect their own leaders, a phenomenon usually known as people power. So many countries have already made the transition from dictatorial systems to democratic systems that political scientists now have a whole specialty called transitology, which studies these transitions. For example, under what economic, social, etc. conditions do they occur? There are many cases to study, since 120 plus countries, at living now about 130, of 200 plus have already made the transition. At living, in fact, over the past half century, half the countries of the world, so about 100 countries, have made this switch, this transition from dictatorships to multi-party democracies. Dictatorial system. Throughout most of history, virtually all political systems were dictatorial systems, that is, where the leaders were created and maintained, usually by force of arms. The leaders were thus dictators, not elected. Democracies are a fairly recent invention, based on an educated population which can read and make informed decisions about which leaders they want in power. Dictators usually do not tolerate opposition to their rule or their ideologies. Ad living, for example, as still the case in the shithole country I live in for the moment, until I leave in about a year or so, namely China. They often kill their opponents or imprison them to keep power. Fortunately, the number of dictatorial systems still existing on the planet is dwindling. Two-thirds of countries now have democratic systems. At the rate that former dictatorial systems are making the transition to democratic systems, there will probably be none left within less than half a century from the time of writing. The world's population will then live in a global democracy. Once that happens, the formation of a global state will be made much easier. Education satellite, EdSat, asterisk. An education satellite, EdSat, beams down educational programs in large numbers to billions of people on the Earth, particularly to poor people, so that they can become skilled and hence richer. The satellite signals would be received by very cheap, small receivers that could be easily smuggled or airdropped into poor countries, especially poor dictatorial countries, to educate their peoples. If the major rich countries of the planet form a mini-globe, the notion of national sovereignty may have by then become largely discredited, with a new ethic replacing it, namely the desirability of removing the last dictatorships from the face of the Earth. The EdSats could play a major role in the de-dictation, that is, removal of dictatorships of the planet, and educating the world's citizens to high level. Embryofacture, asterisk. Embryofacture is a portmanteau word for embryological manufacture, that is, using a nanotech-based approach that mimics the embryological assembly of living creatures to manufacture human-scale products using artificial DNA, artificial cells, etc. Expand the European Union, EU, route, asterisk. This is one of the route models towards the creation of a global state. The European Union, EU, is the first truly effective post-national political unit. At the time of writing, it consisted of 27 nations joined together in an economic common market, a largely common currency with a historical tendency towards political unification. The idea of this model is that the EU serves as the political nucleus which attracts other nation-states to join it, as an example of the accretion model. As non-European nations join it, for example Russia, then the EU will need to change its name, for example to the Federation of Nations, or the Fed-N for short. Once Fed-N becomes big enough, and if it has an explicit globist agenda, it could start calling itself Globa. Fader, asterisk. The fader, plural faders, is the name given to the currency unit, similar to the dollar, euro, etc., of a PNPU, post-national political unit. Federa. Its symbol would be a small letter F with two horizontal strokes instead of the usual one. The two strokes would be analogous with the two strokes of the dollar symbol, the euro symbol, the yen symbol, etc. Federa, asterisk. Federa is a name given to a group of nations that has emerged politically to form a single PNPU, post-national political unit. This would be an intermediate interim term until three-quarters of the world's population had joined it, by which time the term could be changed to Globa, global state. The term Federa is chosen so as to avoid severe criticisms of arrogance being directed at a relatively small number of nations merging politically and laughably calling themselves a world state, when they are nothing of the kind. When the day arrives that three-quarters of humanity has joined it, then the planet would accept the name change and mark that day as historic. A similar name change would be needed for the political unit's currency. Similar such names would be needed if there is more than one such PNPU. Federation of Nations, asterisk, a suggested name for an agglomeration of nation-states that have come together economically, politically, etc., that is not yet big enough to call itself a global state. It's bigger than a nation-state, but smaller than globa. In conversation, one could refer to this agglomeration as Feden or Federa. Feden, asterisk, a conversational abbreviation of the term Federation of Nations. Feminism, the ideology of women's liberation, that is, of the feminists, see below. Feminist, a person who advocates equal rights for women, for example, equal pay for equal work, equal rights to careers, to promotion, etc., with men. FFR, asterisk. An FFR is a fast, fat restaurant, for example, McDonald's, Wendy's, etc. The low prices of the fatty foods they serve and their quick, easy service makes them popular with the lower classes, who are less dietetically knowledgeable, who then become obese in their millions and die prematurely as a result. The FFRs are killing people to the same extent as the tobacco companies. Both are mass murderers and need to be purged. First language. One's mother tongue, learned as an infant and usually the language spoken in daily life. Fringer, asterisk. Fringers are people whose ability levels place them in the fringes of the Bell, or Gaussian, probability distribution curve. For example, in the case of the IQ bell curve, the fringes would be those people who are very stupid or very smart. Fringes are the opposite of peakers, who lie at the peak, that is the middle, of the bell curve, and thus have average abilities. GGH, asterisk. GGH is an acronym for Gross Global Happiness, analogous to the term GNP, Gross National Product, from economics. As nations, or globa, get richer and people turn away from the preoccupations of making money towards becoming happier, criteria will be invented to determine how happy people are in political groups, nations, regions, globa, etc. Emphasis will shift from economic to psychological wealth. Gigadeath, asterisk. Gigadeath, that is, billions of deaths, is the characteristic number of deaths one would expect if a major war were to occur late in the 21st century. This number is obtained by extrapolating up the graph of the number of people killed in major wars from early 19th century Napoleonic wars through the two world wars to a major war late 21st century using late 21st century weapons. An intellect war between the cosmists and Terrans over the species dominance issue would cause gigadeath. Globa, asterisk. Globa is the name given to the global state. Globa would have such institutions as a global parliament, a global president, a global court, a global police force, a global military, etc. It would function in a context of a global culture, a global communication system, a global language, etc. Globa, asterisk. Globa. Globa is also the name given to the global language that everyone on the planet speaks, at least as a second language. This language is very likely to be English, given that it is already by far the most spoken second language. It's already the global business, scientific, tourist, etc. language. Globocrat, asterisk. The term globocrat is a portmanteau word of the term global bureaucrat. That is, a bureaucrat who works in the global executive for a global parliament. Global. Global is an adjective meaning of the globe, that is, planetary or universal. In other words, the usual meaning of the word. Global, asterisk. A global is a person, or a globan, who has moved on from being a multi to someone who thinks globally, has access to the global media, speaks the global language, has a global outlook, has telecommunication friends worldwide, has a globist philosophical outlook, who thinks of the planet as a political unit with a single global culture, etc. In terms of relative cosmopolitan sophistication levels, a global or globan is to a multi as a multi is to a mono. The term global is almost synonymous with the term globan, that is, a citizen of globa, the global state. Global civil war, asterisk. Once a global state has been established, it's still possible that some issue so bitterly divides humanity that a global civil war may occur. The most likely source of such a war is the dispute over whether Artillex should be built this century or not. Experience has already shown that this issue divides people evenly and will probably continue to do so, whether they live in a global state or not. Global communication system. A global communication system is one which is truly global. It would give virtually everyone on the planet all the media of the planet. For example, all the world's TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, the contents of all the books of all the libraries of the world, etc. Its images would be in 3D with a resolution as good as the real world. This will be technically possible in the next few decades due to the bit rate annual doubling (BRAD) law, Brad law. If this law remains valid for another 30 years, the bit rate will be 1 billion times faster than at the time of writing. A global communication system will overcome the tyranny of monocultured media and help people to become globals. This author sees the Brad law as probably the most significant single phenomenon that will enable the creation of a global state. Its importance cannot be overemphasized. It will aid immeasurably towards the creation of a global language, towards global cultural homogenization, and the growth of a global political movement called the Globists. Global court. No matter how global the planet becomes, there will always be disputes between people and groups. Some of these disputes will be very serious and on a large scale. When disputes arise between countries, which in the past may have led to war between them in a global state, such disputes will be settled by the global court, with impartial global judges and expert juries. In a global state, one of its explicit policies will be no war. Hence, disputes are to be settled by discussion and the power of global public opinion and global debate on the global media. If such a global debate does not settle the issue, then the final arbiter will be the global court, analogous to the way disputes are settled inside a traditional nation state. A global court will be the result of the extension of the rule of law to the global level, above the level of the nation state. Nation states will be subject to a higher level of jurisdiction, that is, to that of the global state. Global culture. The creation of a global culture is one of the aims of the Globists. It would come into being together with the creation of a global media, a global language, and cultural homogenization. These are all prerequisites towards the creation of a global state, the final goal of the Globists. A global culture would benefit from the cultural riches of all peoples of the globe. The moment an individual anywhere on the planet has a good new idea, it could be spread instantly across the planet in the global language for everyone to appraise. Ad-libbing, for example, now, 10 years after I wrote this, so now in the 2017, by using, for example, YouTube, people can, individuals empowered, well, until YouTube, the stupid fuck, started censoring, which will kill them in time, because people will just migrate to other platforms. But for the moment, YouTube is still dominant and a monopoly. So people can put up their ideas individually to the world. Everyone would understand each other to a level far greater than is the case today. A global culture would be 100 times culturally richer than any individual nation state, because it would benefit from the minds of the globe rather than the minds of a single nation state. Global democracy. Global democracy exists when all the countries of the planet are democracies. Democracy, that is, the political system of governance, to quote Lincoln, President Lincoln, US President, by the people, for the people, where citizens of a political unit get to elect and reject their leaders according to, quoting Rousseau, social contract, whereby leaders are under a moral obligation to govern well. Otherwise, they'll be voted out of office. Politicians serve the people, not the other way round, as in fuckhole China. As countries get richer and better educated, they usually make the transition from a dictatorial system to a democratic system. There are some 200 plus countries in the world at the time of writing. About 120 plus of them, now ad-libbing about 130 or so, of them are already democracies, with several political parties competing for office in national elections. As peoples get richer and better educated, they want more control over their lives. They refuse to be dictated to by ego-centered tyrants and demand the right to throw out, that is, vote out, politicians who prove themselves in office to be incompetent, corrupt, or dictatorial. With so many countries having made the transition to democracy, political scientists have been able to show that once a country achieves a standard of living over $6,000 per person per year, it does not revert back to dictatorship. Its citizens do not allow it. In case of China, the country I'm still living in after 11 years, but I will leave in a year or so. I'm fed up with this shithole political pygmy nation. China's standard of living is now about $8,000 per person per year. So it's at the top end of the democratic transition threshold between $6,000 to $8,000, as shown by transitologists, the people who study transitions to democracy. Back to the book. With 2/3 of the peoples of the world already living in democracies, it's only a question of time before the whole planet does. Once this happens, war will have become outmoded. The historical record shows that no democracies advanced democracies have ever gone to war against each other. Their peoples do not tolerate it. Global democracy is one of the preconditions for the creation of global economy. At the time of writing, we already live to a large extent in a global economy. An economy that is global, manufactures globally, and distributes its products globally. Thus this we already have up to a point. Of course, it could be a lot more extensive. It's easier to globalize an economy than a culture. A single individual can import a foreign technology and set up a business to profit from it. It takes much longer to change the norms and values of a whole culture. But a global economy means that business people need to travel globally, making them more favourable towards the creation of a global state. Global elections. These are elections for a global parliament that take place all over the planet at the same time to elect the next global government. Global executive, asterisk. The global executive is the equivalent of the executive of a nation-state, that is, the body of bureaucrats who execute the laws passed by their nation-state's parliament. But in this case, it would be at the global level. A person who works in the global executive would be known as a globocrat, equivalent to the term Eurocrat, that is, someone who works in the European Commission, that is, the executive of the European Parliament and the European Council, which consists of the ministers of the 27 nation-states that comprise the European Union at the time of writing of this book. Global government. A government or state that is global. A global government would have power over the whole planet. Its politicians would be elected by all the Earth's citizens. Global happiness, asterisk. Once a global state has been formed, it can concentrate its energies on removing global poverty. Once this goal has been largely achieved, it can then shift its attention gradually towards other major global goals, namely that of increasing global happiness. A lot of money could be spent on researching into the nature of what happiness is. Why are some people happy and others not? What can be done to make people happier? For example, research could discover the nature of marital compatibility and thus lower the incidence of painful divorce and the severely negative impact of broken marriages on children. Once marital and friendship compatibility is much better understood, government social services and companies can use computer databases to find mates and friends amongst millions/billions of people and raise the general happiness level of a culture. Globalism, asterisk. The term globalism is equivalent to the term nationalism, that is, the expression of pride in belonging to a global state. Adherents of globalism are called globalists, see below. Globalist, asterisk. This word is equivalent to the word nationalist. It refers to a person who feels pride in being a citizen of the global state, in being a globan. Globalistic, asterisk. Globalistic is the adjective of the word globalist. It's equivalent to the word nationalistic. Global language. The idea of a global language is that a language will exist, very probably English, which almost everyone on the planet will speak well, is educated into, either at home or certainly at school, so that they can interact with and participate in the global culture. Many of the divisions between cultures on the planet are due to linguistic barriers, so the global language is seen as absolutely essential for the creation of a global state. Without it, it'll be impossible for the planet to create a global culture, and without a global culture, it will be virtually impossible for a global state to get off the ground. The global language need not replace one's mother tongue, but at least everyone will be able to speak it as a second language, so as not to be handicapped by not being able to benefit from global culture delivered on the internet in the world language. It's possible that Chinese may become the world languages. Oh, is it possible that Chinese may become the world language this century? Question mark. This is doubtful due to the incredibly clumsy writing system of the Chinese language. It's a character-based rather than a phonetic letter-based system. Mao Zedong tried to replace it with the pinyin, that's phonetic system, in the early years of his rule, but cultural inertia overruled him, unlike the Vietnamese, who did throw out their character-based writing system. As a result, Chinese children spend years learning how to write, compared to weeks for children of most cultures who learn a phonetic alphabet in kindergarten. The world will thus not tolerate learning Chinese characters. There's also the QWERTY effect to be taken into consideration. The peoples of the world will not bother learning a second language, that is, a second global language. Learning one global language will be difficult and time-consuming enough. Global language snowball effect, asterisk. This term refers to the following snowball effect. Once telecommunications technologies allow easy transmission of the world's media to the world, political ministers of telecommunications will be confronted with the following question. In which languages should my country transmit its programs to the world? Of course, they will send up their own country's language programs to the satellites or onto the internet, but what about other languages? Their decision will be influenced by the proportion of people around the world who know a particular language. At the present time, English is the world's most studied and spoken second language, so the ministers will very probably send up programs in English. Similar decisions will be made by most ministers of telecom around the world. On the other hand, billions of school children and others will ask themselves which second language is best to learn. Their answer will be influenced by the proportion of the programs they see, hear and read on the global media in a particular language. If, for example, they see that roughly half the programs from the world are in English and that about a quarter are in the next most popular language, then they will choose to learn English. One can really see a positive feedback loop being generated here. The two groups of people, that is, the transmitters and the receivers, influence each other until a saturation effect results, creating English as the global language. Global media. A telecommunications service that provides the media of the entire world to the entire world. That is, all the world's radio stations, all the TV stations, all magazines, newspapers, books, etc. are accessible on the global media to everyone. Well, we more or less have that today with the internet ad-libbing in the year 2017. We're definitely getting there. At the time of writing, our media is still largely at the level of the nation-state. That is, the information that goes into people's heads comes essentially from one source, that is, from the national media services of the nation-state that the individual lives in. This is changing. Already there are global news services. For example, America's CNN International, Britain's BBC World, France's TV5 or TV5, Germany's Deutsche Welle, China's CCTV9, etc. But such services are just a drop in the ocean to what will become possible in the next few decades as a consequence of the impact of the BRAD law, bit rate annual doubling of the internet. Once the bit rate is high enough, the media of the planet can be transmitted to the whole planet using vivid 3D, that is three-dimensional images, which will be life-size with real-world resolution, so that the images appear to be as real as the real world. This will have a huge impact on people's mentalities. Anywhere on the planet will be seen as real and as immediate as in one's own living room. Tiny spy planes, or snoopers, will be able to send images of any public event within the limits of globally legislated privacy laws. It will be difficult to keep secrets, hence political decisions will become much better informed and open. Global military. A global military would really be more of a global police force with a military capability. Its purpose would be to defeat criminal political groups militarily, as judged by the global court, the global parliament, and global public opinion against some offending group. For example, if some minor dictator somewhere on the planet started committing genocide, the global military could quickly intervene, defeat the dictator's army, and bring the dictator to the global court. Probably just the globally declared intention of intervening would be enough to stop the dictator and his army. It would be very difficult to raise such an army in the first place, because in a global state, the individual soldiers would be multis with multicultural